Janis Joplin was the greatest blues singer of the last half of the 20th century.
Well, I've been waiting for such a long time. I ain't gonna lose my time. Ain't gonna lose my time to make him mad. Yeah, I'm gonna try just a little bit harder.
Janis Joplin was an incredible singer, someone who was lonely and sad and vulnerable and led a life of excess.
I think Janis Joplin was the greatest white blues singer of all time.
Was it worth all the time that you spent? And the same many thoughts you will do. I just heard that we told your cousin. You tell mama all about it. Tell your mama.
Janis Joplin was born in Port Arthur, a small oil refining town in Texas, in 1943.
She came from quite a comfortable middle-class background and had lots of attention lavished on her by her parents.
Janis Joplin's early childhood, particularly when her siblings arrived, it was quite difficult. She was very needy, and she remained needy for the rest of her life.
She was described as a fairly normal child until she hit puberty age 14, at which point she gained weight, and she kind of found that hard to deal with, and this was the beginning of her not really fitting in.
Janis Joplin's musical heroes were Odetta, those sort of blues women who were strong women with strong voices who sang of pain.
She also listened to Billie Holiday endlessly, and that should give you some indication of the soul music that would find its way into her later music.
Janis enjoyed art and singing, but found school really difficult.
She was really targeted at school, and her reaction to this was to kind of separate herself from the crowd. She would wear boys' clothes when that just really wasn't done at that time, and in a way kind of ostracised herself even more.
She'd attend classes barefoot sometimes, and this is in a blue-collar Texas town. It didn't go so well. And the only people who would really hang out with her were a certain group of boys. And one of them, an American football player, introduced her to the music of Leadbelly. From there, her life would be very different.
July 62, she went to university, and there was a great report in the local newspaper about the girl who dares to be different, and it described Janis Joplin as being somebody who doesn't care what people think of her. She walks barefoot if she wants to. She carries around this auto harp. So essentially, she was becoming a beatnik, and I think she was getting into the beat poets at the same time.
January 1963 saw Janis ditch her studies and move to San Francisco.
She just wasn't a Texas girl. You know, her head was in a very different place. She was very forward-thinking, and at that time, Texas just wasn't a very liberal or forward-thinking place. And of course, San Francisco was having this amazing moment, kind of blooming as this center of alternative counterculture lifestyle. That real kind of rebellious, wild child side of her came out for the first time.
Janis was a struggling musician. She was really not getting much recognition as a singer. This led to increased sort of drug and alcohol use.
She met a guy called John McAlkennan, who was guitarist for Grace Slick's band, Jefferson Airplane. And together they recorded a version of Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out.
Janis Joplin's friends became quite concerned about her health. She'd been doing a lot of drugs and drinking a lot, and in fact, it's said that her weight had plummeted as well. And the story is that they held a bus fare party.
Everyone paid a little bit of cash, and she sang, and other people performed, and they got the money together for her to get the bus back to Texas.
Perhaps the strangest thing about Janis's year back in Texas was how unstrange she was. She almost went straight. She adopted this rather flashy beehive hairdo. She got a job as a computer programmer. She enrolled as a sociology student.
She was trying out the conventional world, so to speak, and it didn't last. She had been injecting speed as well when she was in San Francisco. She gave up drugs, gave up drinking, worked, but then she had enough of that.
Janis was recruited to play for Big Brother and the Holding Company in 1966.
started off just singing on a few tracks and playing the tambourine, but people liked her and she quickly came to play a much bigger part in the band.
Part of the reason for the insistence on this was that she'd had an offer to join Rocky Erickson and the Aliens, and they didn't want to lose her. So she came back and she had a band ready-made for her.
According to Sam Andrew, who's the guitarist, she came in dressed like a little Texan lady and sang in a way that he said was not absolutely brilliant in the way that she later did, but was pretty good. And she didn't give much suggestion that she was intimidated or awed by them. And at the same time, they weren't intimidated by her. She was the girl coming in to help out singing. They certainly weren't thinking of themselves as her potential backing band.
When it came to record their first album, they did it in 3 days. And unfortunately, it sounds like they did it in 3 days. And it had some interesting songs on, such as Janis's own The Intruder. But it was very much a starting point for the better work that was to come.
Big Brother and the holding company got themselves a record deal with Mainstream Records, but they really struggled to get it released. And also the album wasn't really how they'd hoped it was going to sound. They wanted something that was a bit acid rock, but the actual result of what they recorded was more kind of country rock and with kind of folk elements.
Well, Mainstream was a jazz label, so that may partially explain why the album wasn't exactly typical of what they later became, or, you know, wasn't exactly representative of them. It wasn't really a acid rock album or a heavy rock album. It's really quite acoustic, a little bit folky. It's good, but it's quieter than what you'd expect from blues belter Janis Joplin.
They were touring a lot. They were really building a kind of groundswell of interest in them. And of course, at this time, they played the Monterey Pop Festival, which was the moment that really kind of opened people's eyes to them. And suddenly everyone saw this band and heard this woman singing for the first time.
Down by my window, just looking out at the rain.
The Monterey Festival was the moment that Janis went into the national consciousness.
My window, just looking out at the rain.
They'd played quite early in the day on the bill, and the organisers of the festival were so blown away by Janis's performance, they put them on again, so they actually ended up playing twice.
And it felt like a ball and chain.
On the Saturday, the performance was due to be filmed, but their manager said, absolutely not, you can't film it unless you pay us. That being said, after their performance on the Saturday was so successful, when they were asked to perform again on the Sunday, it was allowed to be filmed, and Columbia Records ended up signing them off the back of that.
It was just absolutely incredible. It's totally powerful. It's a beautiful, beautiful blues with so much passion and emotion, and backed perfectly by this, you know, heavy rock band. And that was when Albert Grossman, who was Dylan's manager, said, "I want to sign them," and it's when they signed to Columbia.
I would like to meet a lady who has been called a combination of Lead Belly and a Steam Engine and Calamity Jane and Bessie Smith. I don't know who called her that combination, but it's strange. Anyway, she is certainly one of the most distinctive female performers in the music business. I mean, of course, Janis Joplin. Yeah.
Dick Cavett really enjoyed Janis's company. He called her his little songbird, and she took a bit of umbrage at this at first. Said, "No, I'm just a singer." And that kind of broke the ice between them. And she'd tell him little snippets of her life, things like how she'd never tried to water ski, things such as whenever they sent a limo for her, she'd always insist on sitting in the front of it. And Dick Cavett had her back time after time. They made each other laugh. You can see that they were sort of conversational soulmates.
How are your press relations? Do you have any problems with interviews and that kind of stuff?
Well, other than having to do them when you don't feel like it,
Yeah.
and other than having to talk to someone who doesn't seem to understand what you're saying, consequently the words coming out a little stranger than you meant them, no.
No.
Janis later said that he was the only interviewer who didn't ask her to explain herself so she could make these strange pronouncements, and he would let her get away with it. And it was all part of building her public profile, and she was becoming a significantly bigger star than Big Brother and the holding company.
She would have been like nothing a lot of people would have ever seen before. She was very outspoken, not a, you know, prim kind of singer of that time, the idea of what a female singer should be. And that must have been very intriguing, but she was also incredibly charming as well. And I think people instantly fell in love with her, and America really took her under their wing in that way.
Fish are jumping now. Hey, the come on, come time.
In 1968, Big Brother and the holding company released Cheap Thrills.
The album Cheap Thrills is the first time that Janis really puts her stamp on the music that she's releasing. She was really key in producing and arranging the album. She's said to have been there first thing in the morning, the last one to leave at night. Even though she was kind of struggling with her own demons, she was really focused on making this great album.
Cheap Thrills was originally going to be called Sex, Dope and Cheap Thrills, but the record company said, can we just make it Cheap Thrills? So they did, but nonetheless, it is an absolute acid rock classic.
It went to #1, it was certified gold, and it sold over 1 million copies after its first month. And it's really the thing that launched Janis Joplin as a solo artist as opposed to with the band.
The original cover was of the band naked on a bed in a hotel room, and that was soon changed to the almost iconic R. Crumb cover that we all know so well today. But this was Janis being properly produced, and it had such songs as Piece of My Heart, which I think would become her signature, and it was a massive success.
In December 1968, the inevitable happened, and Janis Joplin ended up parting ways from Big Brother and the holding company.
The decision was made. It was mutual, but with Janis, as ever, it was all about Janis. She'd outgrown these people, and the psychedelic tinges of their music wasn't really what she was into.
It was her time to shine. She had to take centre stage and not be part of a group anymore. But unfortunately, this also meant that she was on her own and she was lonely. And again, this was something that she reacted to by indulging in drink and drugs.
She then formed the Kozmic Blues band, who was really her band. The musicians were hired, and it was going towards more of a soul sound.
But I never found out why.
The first Kozmic Blues Band album was a bit of a ragbag. It had a Bee Gees song on it, To Love Somebody, and Janis only wrote one full song on her own.
This was characterised by the use of horns and was a lot more soulsy.
Has come late.
This was a band that was based in the idea of soul and Motown and Stax. It was a bluesy, funky sound, quite different to what Big Brother had been doing. The debut album got mixed reviews. It wasn't as well received as the one before from Big Brother. It did sell really well, and it still went gold within 2 months. But unfortunately, Janis didn't take criticism well. Those negative comments really affected her.
By 1969, Janis's heroin and alcohol use was becoming a really serious concern to her friends.
I'm gonna need it now. I'm gonna hold it, yeah. I'm gonna use it till the day I die.
Her producer, Gabriel Meckler, staged an intervention to get her clean, and he said, come stay with me and get away from, you know, the druggy pals. And so that's what she did.
In 1969, Janis headed on a European tour, which included a gig at the Royal Albert Hall and a performance on Tom Jones's TV show.
Oh, that you never, ever, ever they just sit there crying, or just sit there feeling bad.
She had somewhat of a problem with European audiences, and specifically British audiences, and she described them as uptight and not knowing how to get down.
And I think maybe that was just the difference in the cultures of the time of how her British audience was compared to the US one.
She found that the audience were much, much more staid than she'd ever experienced before, and she didn't like it. So the next time she was on the Dick Cavett show, she was saying, look, they were too uptight for me. They didn't get it. And she didn't want polite applause. She wanted people on their feet, moving.
In August 1969, Janis was asked to perform at the Woodstock Festival.
Janis Joplin was asked to play at Woodstock and she agreed, and in fact the promoters basically put her in as a headliner, but Janis didn't really realise how big a deal Woodstock was.
When she was on the helicopter and looked down at the huge crowds, and she wanted to go on immediately, but she couldn't. There was a 10-hour wait, and so she did what people with drug problems tend to do, is she took a load of heroin.
So by the time she went on stage, she was her voice was cracking, she was addressing the crowd, she wasn't hitting all her notes, and she most certainly wasn't on her best form.
Though I've looked everywhere, and I can't find me anybody to love, to feel my hair so.
She was, I think it's fair to say, totally out of it. And later, she realised this. And although you find some of her performance on the director's cut of the film, she wanted the whole experience exercised from the film and from the collective memory of it.
Her last performance with the Kozmic Blues Band was at Madison Square Garden in 1969, which also featured Joni Mitchell and Tina Turner.
She gave up drugs, she stopped drinking and actually kind of switched to a much healthier lifestyle for this quite extended holiday in Brazil.
She met a guy called David Niehaus, who is working in the Peace Corps, and he didn't take heroin. She fell in love with him, and he wanted her to get away from rock music and get away from all that stuff and travel the world with him.
He didn't have much idea who Janis Joplin was. He just loved her for herself. And I'm not sure that she'd ever really had that before.
On her return to the United States, she started using heroin again, which led to the pair splitting up, and Janis formed her new band, the Full Tilt Boogie Band.
Janis's last band were the Full Tilt Boogie Band, and this was the first band that she'd put together herself.
She was quoted as saying that finally this was her band, that she believed it finally showed her style and her sensibilities as a musician.
And it said that at this time she was seemingly very happy. She was starting to really settle and focus into her work. She wasn't taking as many drugs, although she was said to have increased her drinking.
In June 1970, Janis and the Full Tilt Boogie Band joined the Festival Express train tour,
which was this incredible train which went across America full of amazing bands, and some of her performances on that tour are said to be the best of her career.
From what you can see from the film that was made of it, it seemed like quite a happy time. She was with the Full Tilt Boogie Band, who are young Canadian musicians, all very good and very enthusiastic.
Seems to be quite a happy period for her as well, because she was jamming with the other musicians on the train. And I mean, as a music fan, it must have been absolutely unbelievable to have seen those gigs.
She set about calling herself Pearl, which was a nickname for herself, and recording an album of that name with Paul Rothchild, the producer of The Doors, who only agreed to take on Janis because he believed that she had finally cleaned up her act, drugs and drink-wise.
Tell your mama, babe, what you want. Tell your mama, babe, what it need, what you want, what it need, what you want.
Pearl's an amazing album. It's got Get It While You Can, Move Over, A Woman Left Lonely, and it's just got this brilliant combination of sort of soulfulness and that old, raw, bluesy power.
Mercedes-Benz was actually one of the last songs that Janis Joplin ever recorded, and she wrote it in a bar next to a venue where she would play it for the first time later that night in New York. And it was inspired by a piece of poetry by a beatnik poet about having a Mercedes-Benz. And of course it's this kind of, really simple a cappella song about the trappings of life and the things that we acquire that we do or don't need. It's a beautiful song and it's very emotional.
On the 4th of October 1970, she was found dead in her room at the Landmark Hotel in Hollywood.
Janis's musical legacy is that of an extraordinary live performer with a completely original voice.
This, really kind of vulnerable, alternative, wild child who went on stage and performed like no one had seen before.
She stayed quite true to herself, and she showed that it's possible to be a blues singer and sell lots of records.
The likes of Stevie Nicks, Florence Welch of Florence and the Machine, you can trace their performances back to Janis Joplin.
She remains one of the best-selling artists in American history, having sold over 15 million records.
Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? My friends all drive Porsches, I must make amends. Worked hard all my lifetime, no help from my friends. So, oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz?